These are unusual times in which we live. We're facing great challenges to our civil rights, and yet we will not surrender, we will not give up, we will keep fighting back. We convene July 12th through 15th in Chicago at the Chicago Hilton Hotel. On that Wednesday, the Vice President of Intel will be with us, and Terry McAuliffe, Governor of Virginia, will be with us. The workshops on our share of business and high tech, building a Push Tech Expo Center in 1,000 churches around the country. That night, 200 of our youth will get scholarships. We need you to be with us on July the 12th, a Wednesday. On Thursday, our labor breakfast, Therese will speak to us, head of the Democratic National Committee. At noontime, Reverend Dr. Bob will speak to us, and the young and others will be here. We put the role of the church in the struggle now to resist going backwards and, in fact, to go forward. The night life beyond the playing field. People like Billy Williams and other great athletes, Isaiah Thomas, will be with us on that night. On that Friday, it's a big day, women's luncheon. We'll have Elizabeth Warren speaking, Maxine Waters. We're honoring Aretha Franklin on that day. She's been such a force for good for us. That night, we're having our forum. Senator Mr. Kennedy and J.B. Pritzker and others will be here that night. A forum on the governor's choices in 2018, really. But then this Saturday, a Black-Brown Summit Conference. We convene together. One of the largest cities, the majority of Black and Brown. We must learn to live together. There's power together, protect our interests. We will see you July 12th through 15th in Chicago at the Rainbow Push Coalition. God bless you and keep hope alive.
Good afternoon, everybody. I thought I better come up here and get him. Y'all know he's a preacher, and I didn't want him to get the line up here in front of y'all. So I thought I better come and interrupt him. Hasn't this been one remarkable day so far? I've enjoyed it so much. And I want to thank Reverend Jesse Jackson and Butch Wing for bending the moral arc of the university. If we leave with one thing today, it'll be that it doesn't bend by itself. The pendulum doesn't swing by itself. It swings because somebody gets in and puts some elbow grease to it, and that's why we call it push, isn't it, Reverend? That's why we call it push. I also want to thank Brian Tippins. Brian, where are you? Some of you know that Reverend Jackson and I are both from Greenville, South Carolina, which is we're sort of the same kind of crazy. And we grew up in a neighborhood. They already know it, Reverend. We might as well admit it. We grew up in a neighborhood called Nickeltown. And Nickeltown had many things, 3 housing projects, a lot of low-income people, a lot of hard-working people. But one of the things it didn't have until Brian Tippins and HP made it possible was a community-based technology lab for the children who now live in Nickeltown. And I want to thank you on their behalf for that. It's based in the Phyllis Wheatley. If you know your Black history, you know Phyllis Wheatley was one of the first Black women poets in the United States, wrote in the 1700s. And so that's where your computers are, Brian, and you can come see them and come see the kids anytime you like. Okay, we've got an amazing panel today, and I would ask them to join me on stage. If you would join me, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And because I've got my pad and I don't want to fall off that chair, I'm going to stand here at the podium if that's okay. I think Butch has already described what the panel is about. Can you have diversity and inclusion without social justice and racial equality? That's pretty serious. Not going to be many jokes about that, especially not in this environment. But I want to start out by thinking a little bit about this is not such an unusual thing for us. It's a little bit new out here in the Valley, where these huge tech companies are being asked to weigh in on things that are not part of their core business, not part of what they do to make money. How do you feel about HB1 visas? How do you feel about live murders being broadcast on a social media platform. How do you feel about the environment? How do you feel about immigration? Asking you to make decisions and judgments and public statements about issues that are not centrally core to your business. And then you've got, Reverend talked about the 4 things that you got going for you. You got 5 things that may or may not go for you. You got customers, you've got employees, you've got shareholders, you've got regulators, and you've got executives. And all of them have their own point of view. So what I want to start out with is, what we're going to do today is I'm going to ask them each a question, and then you can answer it, of course, in any way you feel like. But I want to start out by introducing Danielle Brown, who is Chief Diversity Officer at Intel Corporation. Danielle, raise your hand. She's not Chief Diversity Officer anymore. She is Vice President of Human, she's been moving up the ladder fast. Vice President of Human Resources and Group Chief Human Resource Officer for Sales, Manufacturing, G&A, and Leadership at Intel. She leads the organization responsible for developing and deploying HR strategies and solutions. She's also previously served as Chief Diversity Officer, where she was responsible for the goal of full representation, which made a lot of news a few years. Talking about taking stands that are not necessarily making you comfortable. When Krasanich and Intel came out with, by 2020, that's where PushTech 2020 got its name from, frankly, is Intel's statement about what they would accomplish by 2020. Is that right? And so I want to ask you, in this context, diversity and inclusion mean one thing in the United States, but it may mean something entirely different, or it may mean nothing in a country that is not the U.S. In Brazil, it may mean one thing. It may mean color cast. In the Far East, it may mean something else. Talk to me about how you, as a leader in a U.S.-based corporation, translate what we think of as social justice to all these different cultures where you have to do business.
Yeah, that's a great question, Janice. And what I'll say is Intel is about 100,000 employees worldwide, and we're about 50-50, 50,000 people in the U.S. and 50,000 people outside the U.S. And so if you're talking about diversity and inclusion, and yes, racial and social justice and equality, you have to think about that globally. One thing I will admit is, as a tech company, we've not been as good thinking about that stuff outside the U.S. as we have inside the U.S. We've really been laser focused on making breakthroughs here in the States first. But there are a lot of issues, and some of them might not be so obvious, and I'll give you a couple examples. Think about in Europe right now what's going on with some of the elections there and the fear around immigration and some of the ugliness that's coming out. A lot of our employees in Europe have a lot of concern. There's a lot of tension there. In places like Malaysia, for example, where we have 10,000 employees, there's a lot of tension around race, actually, between Chinese and Indian and Malay employees, and that's a big issue. In some countries, you know, it is illegal to be gay. And so when we send our employees that are part of the LGBT community over there, we have to think about, are they safe? Are they protected? Are they okay? And so these matters of justice definitely extend globally. And as a diversity and inclusion practitioner, we have to make sure that we're using that global lens and really understanding the cultural context and sensitivity, because it's very complicated here. It's very complicated there as well, Janice.
Thank you for that. Let's move on now and talk about what the experience is like more in the United States. Justin Steele is principal at Google.org. Raise your hand, Justin. Okay. Google recently invested over $11 million in 10 organizations fighting for racial justice. Now, that's not what Google does for a living, not principally. Including the Center for Policing Equity, a think tank based in New York that's working with police departments and communities to create a database that tracks police interactions. How did y'all get into that business and why?
I don't think I have time to tell you the full story, but I'll tell you the long arc of it, which is Our employees care deeply about this, and the Black Googler Network, which I'm a part of, is I've been working in solidarity with Yolanda and team for many, many years. And when the Charleston church shooting happened a few years ago, there was a real poignant moment of raised consciousness. Our Black Googler Network, we organized a global day of solidarity where folks were wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts that carried all the way through to our company meeting where our founders were wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts on stage. And in my role as Google.org, I lead all of our philanthropy in the United States. We give a lot of money. And I went to the company and said, I think that we should stand up in solidarity, not just with our employees, not just with diversity and recruiting, but we should put our money where our mouth is, and we should start to give money to racial justice organizations. And to the company's credit, they stepped up. They said yes. We gave an initial grant to Patrice Cullors, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, to do some of this difficult work around organizing and policing, and we've carried that through. We're $20 million in, and I think part of this is an employee story. Our employees care deeply about this work. They want to work for a company they're proud of that stands for the social issues they care about. I think particularly in the tech sector, the employees carry a lot of weight. There's a war for talent. Companies really want to attract and retain the best talent, and if companies lift their voices and care about this work, companies are going to stand up. So I'm like a part-time funder, part-time community organizer inside my company. I'm always, for those of you who've been in this ecosystem, I'm organizing film screenings and bringing Black Lives Matter founders to talk to our employees. And Brian Stevenson came and spoke to our whole company and delivered a knockout speech that really raised consciousness. So a lot of it is that, and then part of it is this is our mission. We are about equal participation in society through technology, but we recognize that technology alone can't level the playing field. And you need more than just technology to give people equal access. And if you don't get out into the community and get proximate, like Brian would challenge us to do, you're never going to level the playing field. And so part of this is our mission to make sure we get out there and try to level the playing field in a real way, in addition to the tech piece of it.
Laura Murphy, let me get you involved in this conversation. Laura is senior advisor to Airbnb and former president of the American Civil Liberties Union. So you're talking about going from one extreme to like the other, right? Nice tech company, help you find some place to stay. And the ACLU will pin you to the wall if you don't act right. So Laura, I want you to talk a little bit about, I've known Laura a long time, so she lets me. In Japan, for example, the company has a program called Samara, if you talk a little bit about that, and how Airbnb is stepping out beyond its box, getting out of the comfort zone and doing some things, and how it might impact here in the U.S.
Thank you. So Samara is a program that one of Airbnb's founders conceived of because in Japan, people are leaving cities, leaving the countryside rather, and moving to the cities. And that means that there are a lot of elderly people who have been left behind in the countryside. And so when the concept of home sharing was introduced in Japan, there were a few brave souls, but one woman, for example, in a very small rural area, was considered crazy for inviting strangers into her home, and then she enlisted her neighbors to give tours and to show people how rice was made and all kinds of things. And so one of the three founders of Airbnb, Joe Gebbia, decided that this was a real model for aging in place, and so he worked to help build a community center so that the hosts could meet with each other. It can be part of the tours of the area, and it's really a novel form of economic development. And in the interest of full disclosure, the reason Janice is asking me this is because she wants to push Airbnb to do that kind of economic development in low-income neighborhoods in the United States. And she is saying, if they can do it in Japan, they can do it in the United States. So I have been taking that message back to the leadership at Airbnb. And in addition to doing that, I think Airbnb is interested in creating a loan program so that people who want to age in place and want to get their homes ready to host guests, whether they need lights or repairs or that sort of thing, maybe there can be some sort of loan guarantee. We're also talking to banks about how they evaluate homeowners' ability for refinance or eligibility for refinance based on the income they're generating through home sharing. So Janice is on a mission to get Airbnb to be bigger partners with the community in supporting economic development, and I support that.
Thank you, Laura. And I guess if I'm on a mission, it's one that I learned from this man in the front row. Corporations have enormous power to do good. I can remember we had sometime a beef with Walmart. We didn't always see eye to eye with them on certain things. But when the guy came out in favor of reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, we had to say, well, maybe, not necessarily. And so corporations, you have money, you have clout, you have government relations armies on Capitol Hill that people listen to. And so it's only just and fair that you would do what you can to make these communities better. And I will tell you that in a lot of, what's your fastest growing host community in the United States?
Oh, sorry. The fastest growing host community are in cities among middle-aged women, 49 and over, and minority communities. So if you do a map of hotels in Chicago, you'll see hotels concentrated in the central, business district. But if you do a map of Airbnbs, you will see Airbnbs all over the south side of Chicago. In fact, it's in Washington, D.C., in southeast Washington, where you cross the Anacostia River, where most tourists don't go. That area has over 400 Airbnbs. And in one city, we were able to tell the mayor that 3,500 people were able to generate $11 million in revenue for that city. So this is really a vehicle for economic development and self-empowerment and improving income.
And that was a Damien that said he didn't like BS conversations. When you start talking about rebuilding neighborhoods and helping grandmama put new storm windows and new doors in her house so that she can rent it out, then you're talking about bringing in commercial activity that will be drawn like a magnet to that. You're getting beyond the BS conversation, right? Now you start talking about something that really matters to people. Okay, I get off my soapbox and go back to, let's ask Molly Q. Ford, who is here on behalf of Salesforce. She's Senior Manager of Public Relations. No, that's not what she is now. She is, Molly, what's your job now?
So I'm the Director of Global Equality
That's
at
right.
Salesforce.
You used to be in
Yes.
public relations, and you've turned all those skills into something that you had a passion for. I want you to tell us a little bit about the passion, but I also want you to speak to this notion of, in 2016, the Obama administration sort of put out a mandate that large companies be encouraged or required to disclose employee compensation broken down by gender, race, ethnicity. And your CEO was very aggressive about taking that up, especially when it came to gender. And I wish you would tell us, how has that worked out for the company? And do you see it progressing beyond what we do with women, African Americans, Latinos, and others?
Absolutely. So I started out as a career public relations person, and I had a passion about equality and talking about it. And I just started organically within the organization, finding those women champions, connecting people to sponsors, and my work was recognized, and Mark Benioff asked me if I would like to start an equality office. And the first thing I said to him was, sheep begat sheep, right? Shepherds don't bring the sheep. Sheep come to other sheep. So I said, if we really want to signal to the industry that we're serious about this, we need to double down and have more people of color, underrepresented minorities, and women in our leadership, as well as on our board. And then I got a boss named Tony Profit out of that. So that was a great thing. So one of the things Salesforce has absolutely doubled down on is the gender wage gap. So we recognize that in the US, on average, a woman makes 80 cents to the man's dollar. But then when you take that to be people of color, a black woman or African American woman is going to make 64 cents to that dollar and a Latina 54 cents to that dollar. So I'm really proud that I have a company that basically said, we're going to eliminate this gap. And Mark Benioff has been very clear that 2 women came to him and said, we'd just like to look at it. And he was shocked, oh, I wouldn't run a company like that. Yeah, let's look at it, right? And we did an assessment, and this year we've done our second assessment a few weeks ago, and we found that we needed to pay out $3 million to statistically balance wages for, equal pay for equal work.
Wow.
That's beyond the BS conversation. That's putting where the rubber meets the road. Let's ask a question to, and I don't know how to pronounce your last name.
Shabomahim.
Shabomahim. Okay. You recruit. I'm sorry. It's a beautiful name.
Thank you.
I really wasn't trying to be funny then. You work at Street Code Academy, and the students there, it's a tech training program in not Palo Alto, but East Palo Alto, which for the uninitiated is something different. And the students range in age from 6 to 70 years old. You get youngsters and old folk like me who are trying to learn technology, and people all in between. Do you ever worry that you are preparing folk for opportunities that don't exist?
The assumption, I think, first of all, pray for me up here. I'm very humble to be in the room, and then even more humble to be on this panel. But I'm proud to represent Street Code and the students that are there. You mentioned the assumption I heard in your question was that we are preparing students for jobs. It's a tech training, but as was mentioned earlier, tech is everywhere, and entrepreneurship is a core part of what we were talking about. One of the most hurtful things for me being involved in the work for the past 3 years and being involved in youth development and community development work previous to that was that companies didn't really have the right perspective on East Palo Alto, on the students that we had. And so it was very difficult to transition even a prepared student into a job. And so if you notice on my shirt, we have 3 tenets of our curriculum. One is hack, one is hustle, one is design. We started out as a coding organization because at the time, we were working, I'm not a coder myself or a technologist myself, but I knew that, or I figured that in East Palo Alto for that, and for all those who don't know, Reverend Jesse Jackson eloquently said you had to drive to Oakland to get to China. You have to drive to East Palo Alto to get to Oakland. And so East Palo Alto is sitting here in the middle of Silicon Valley, formed on the premise of justice, right? I moved to East Palo Alto a year ago, but I came into a city that Dr. Faye McNair Knox, who's in the building, that Miss Lakiba Pittman, who's in the building, fought to make a city and make it on the back of justice, right? So you have here this city that's built on justice, built on equity, and yet being disconnected from Silicon Valley all around them. Of course, you're gonna have these issues. So I was honored to be a part of that, and so when I said we're disconnected, how do we do it? Coding was the first thing that people said. Well, not everybody's a coder. Not everybody wants to code, and that's not all of the jobs, right? If we take a look at HP Enterprise, I would guess not more than 25%. I mean, I'm just guessing, but maybe not more than a quarter are actually doing coding. So we diversified our approach to include hack being the technology, hustle being the entrepreneurship, and design being the creativity. That's the full ecosystem of it. And we wanted to create our own ecosystem. We didn't want to say, we have to be a part of your ecosystem. We wanted to say, if we look inside this room, we can find developers, we can find entrepreneurs, we can find designers and creative folks. So that's what we're doing in East Palo Alto. And we want to give just people, our students, choice to be able to say, do I want to be a part of the broader Silicon Valley, the broader tech sector, and change it in the ways that these panelists and the former ones are doing, or do I want to create my own? And all of those efforts, I think, will end with the same diversity in our ecosystem.
Let me push back on you just a little bit. As somebody who ran a small law firm for 20-something years, okay, you got your own business. But if you're not representing banks and insurance companies, you're not going to have it successful for long. So even if you've got your own ecosystem, you still got to have customers and clients and money and all the stuff that goes with that. Tell me, how do you think about that?
Well, we think about inclusion, and we think about the broader Silicon Valley, right? Our goal is to connect them. I mean, we had Plugged In, which Reverend Jesse Jackson. In fact, Meg said Reverend Jesse Jackson was here 3 years ago. I was here in 1998, 1999 when Butch and Reverend Jackson were pushing on the same things, and we were taking, I followed him around the same tour, watching push these same buttons. So it's been around for a long time. We've been disconnected, right? Plugged In was starting to, and then that no longer existed, and so we found this separation. To me, it's still about connecting. Sure. It's still about connecting, but we don't. The narrative is always, you have it and we got to get to it. When in actuality, if I was to tell you the truth, I actually feel like we have it and they don't have it. Meaning, the reason why we started Street Code to be 16 to 24 year olds. I brought my son along. He was 11 years old. He built an app. Zuckerberg tweeted it out. 237,000 people across the world, posted on it. They flew him out to Saudi Arabia to speak. He was not supposed to be there. He was 11 years old. We were pushed because of the spirit of our students, because they have an inclusive. When grandma wants to come and do coding, what are we gonna say? In this room, if grandma wants, we're gonna say, let's go. When little cousin wants to, we're gonna say, let's go. That's our spirit, is inclusive. So now we have all ages, we have all zip codes, we have all genders, and now the spirit of inclusion is embedded right there in that little pocket of East Palo Alto.
It's not what you do, it's who you are.
It's who we are.
Gotcha.
And so I think we have something that other people can learn from. So it benefits to connect.
There you go. I hope you know I wasn't picking on you, but I just wanted to get that out because Laura Gomez, you're an atypical CEO. Project Include is your baby, and you've been doing a great job with it. You have a startup, VYV, that was, and she walks the talk. She co-founded it with a Palestinian-Canadian man. Is he here?
He's not here.
Okay, but she doesn't just talk about diversity, she practices it. She worked at YouTube and also at Twitter. And you talk about stereotypes. What role do stereotypes play, and to what extent do they contribute to the few blacks and Latinos who work in the industry? From your viewpoint.
I grew up here. I was an undocumented child immigrant to Redwood City. And actually my first job, Brian knows, was here exactly at this campus. I haven't been back since I was 17. This is my first job here. So it's very different to be.
You were an undocumented child immigrant.
Yes, in Silicon Valley. The stereotypes, let me go back to what Laura from Code 2040 said. The creation of wealth from those employees. I happened to be an early Twitter employee. When Twitter went public, I happened to have money I never thought I would have. I happened to go and take that money and create a startup. So while I admire all the panelists here, their founders tend to look the same. So you will see less of me, less of you up pitching to venture capital. And that's a whole different discussion that maybe we can talk about in 20 years. But for now, I think it's important to talk about the stereotypes that women, intersectional women, men, and specifically in these companies, being Latina, being very strong-willed, obviously we get into the stereotypes of who I am. Then when the other Latino, I was the first Latina at Twitter, and then when the other Latino came, he's Puerto Rican, but they both thought we were Mexican, and I am, but he's Puerto Rican. So there's this diversity of cultures within even the Latino culture, within even the African American experience, and I think those stereotypes, and then we just have to adhere, like I really do. Sometimes I tend to go more towards my sort of friends who are black women rather than Latino, because Latino men may not think about intersectionality as much as we do. So I think it's important in Project Include, it's 8 women. We all have over 145 years combined experience in tech. Some were venture capitalists, some of our founders, some of them have worked at companies that you saw up here. And so with Project Include, we really think about breaking that stereotype. There's Asians, there's Blacks, there's me, I'm an immigrant, there's everyone. We are all, and we have difficult conversations. And I think having the difficult conversations have allowed us to move and show progress at a faster rate. But if stereotypes exist within diversity and within tech companies, those stereotypes exist 10 times, if not they're magnified 100 times for founders of color. So every time a founder of color comes up to me, I'm like, what do you need from me? How can I help? Because I think those stereotypes of, are they really that bright to create an app? Do they have traction? Do they have usage? And most of the time I will tell you yes, except they don't have access to the capital. They don't have access to create that wealth, and they won't be able to diversity and inclusion is in our spirit, so we're already thinking about it. I already hired a veteran in my team of 5 here. I'm already thinking about all the layers. I'm going against those, even the stereotypes that people have about me, about what undocumented immigrant looks like, right? And who we are now as a startup founder. And I think now more than ever, it's important for people of color in tech to come and say, okay, here's who I am, because if you don't see me in the face, that's why I'm up here. That's why I'm taking calls from reporters, is because if someone doesn't see me, 2 of my mentees saw me on USA Today, and they reached out to me on LinkedIn, and now they're my mentees, and they're actually at Code 2040 alone, and they're working this summer and for other tech companies. So I think it's important for them. I get tired, I don't want to be talking to USA Today or the Christian Monitor, but I do it because at least someone will see it, and then we'll break that stereotype of what an undocumented immigrant looks like.
If you could, I want to ask you a quick follow-up. If you could give one piece of advice to a CEO who wants to get beyond stereotypes in how they allocate capital or hire leaders, for example, what would you advise them?
For new CEOs or entrepreneurs or CEOs of established companies?
CEOs who have capital, who've got VC CEOs.
I think first and foremost, help understand how to grow the product. Like, you can give $1 million to a founder, but if that founder doesn't really know how to grow their product or a market fit, it's not going to really, it's how can you help? You know, I was talking to another founder here about their app, and I was like, how are you going to grow your app? How is this going to? Because once you have that growth, at least you'll have access to it. I do think that Intel made decisions to invest in founders of color. I think Comcast has done the same, and there's been other initiatives. In the past 2 years since I started this, I've seen many more sort of women investment firms, people of color, brown and black founders uniting. So I think it's really, really important to try to cultivate that entrepreneurship and that spirit of all of the entrepreneurs that don't have access to Sand Hill Road. So if any of you are entrepreneurs, you can email me. I'll introduce you to Sand Hill Road.
Thank you for that. You know, Justin, let me ask you. It's admirable what Google is doing in this space around police misconduct and funding agencies that are fighting for racial and social justice. But where I'm from down south, there are lots of governments, local and state governments, that refuse to collect data because they don't want to know what the data will reveal. That's one of the wonderful things about the Valley. You know, what gets measured gets done. But down in Dixie, Jeff Sessions knows what he's doing. He don't want no evidence of it, don't want his fingerprints on it. So what can a company like Google do? You shouldn't encourage me. What can or should a company like Google do to say, look, we've got tools for you, but how can you use your influence to get beyond some of that, you know, when it's more than just a coincidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think the trend is really concerning. One of our nonprofit partners had sent me a new federal bill that is actually preventing the census from being able to measure by race, you know, all the different disparate outcomes. And so we're actually seeing a move in the public sector, at least the rhetoric is to less data and less transparency, which is for a data company, obviously pretty concerning. I mean, I think the quick answer to your question is, as much as we want to push Google and challenge Google and make Google uncomfortable, I also think we want to be humble and not necessarily presume that Google is supposed to be the face of trying to solve these social justice issues. And so what we're really trying to do is empower a lot of the people on the front lines. That's why we're giving grants to people like Patrice Cullors or giving grants to Brian Stevenson and making sure that those folks are being empowered and well-resourced to go out and do their thing. And then I think we're also trying to bring, since data is on our mission, both of our employees and resources to try to do that. One of the kind of aha moments for me, I know Mecca is in the audience. He's one of our lead engineers at Google, who's been working in solidarity with us on this work. And Mecca and I were on a call with the DOJ, and this was right after Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were shot. And Mecca and I, as engineers, are saying, all right, give us the data. Like, we want to crunch the data, we want to run the data. And they actually told us it doesn't exist. There is no data set. There's 15,000 police agencies across this country, and the data actually doesn't exist. And that was a huge light bulb moment for us. So Mecca, as an engineer, is saying, how can I get in here as an engineer and crack this? And as a funder, I'm trying, who out there is trying to crack this? And so that's the grant to Center for Policing Equity, $5 million. Those are voluntary partnerships. So they've got 40% of the U.S. population covered now through their work. But part of it is like, how do we fund some of those folks who are agitating for more accountability, particularly in the South, like you said, which I think we're oftentimes focused on the coast but not focused on the South, and trying to put people like Mecca out there and get those big brains to work on how we can crack some of this. It's a tough issue.
Well, thank you for that, and I think your take on it is exactly right. It's going to take effort from many sources.
Register today for the Rainbow Push Coalition and Citizenship Education Fund's 46th Annual International Convention, Wednesday, July 12th through July 15th, 2017, at the Hilton and Towers in Chicago, Illinois. The theme this year is Heal and Rebuild. For further information, go to www.rainbowpush.org or call 773-373-3366. July 12th through July 15th, 2017, Chicago, Illinois.
We want to open it up now for a few questions from the audience. We've got about 20 minutes, 10, 15, 10 or 15. Okay, we'll take some questions. But before we do that, I just wanted to make a comment and say that at bottom, these issues of racial justice and inclusion are ethical and moral issues. And it's not the first time that our country has encountered these. We went through a great civil war. We have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which basically rewrote the Constitution because we redefined what freedom meant and what your rights meant in this country. And we're continuing Jesse Jr.'s book, A More Perfect Union. We're a work in progress, and having people like you at the table helping to make those decisions and make those priorities felt is important. So I want you to give our panelists a round of applause. And I see a question here. You want to stand?
For Laura around investment. But before I do that, I got to thank you, Reverend Jackson, because I was here 3 years ago. And because you introduced me to George Zinn at Microsoft, we are scaling our platform right now for them. We are hiring 200 workers, building a pipeline from Richmond to Silicon Valley. We are providing elder care, infant care, massage, house cleaning to their employees because they want them to be able to stay in their homes as a wellness benefit. And
Yikes. But you gotta have that anchor.
But to Laura's point, I have raised $860,000. Only 15 black women in the history of this country have raised over $1 million, I'm told by Project Diana. At this point, Microsoft has assigned a director to go to meetings with me, to meet investors, to meet the media. And I think that is highly commendable for them. When we talk about the role of a corporation and what they can do to create change, is amazing. But look at what we have to do in order to change the face of diversity and inclusion in Silicon Valley. So I'm really interested in hearing some specific tactics around what we can do, not just from Sand Hill Road, but from corporations, where clearly Microsoft is making a commitment to change, and change that you inspired that day, Reverend. So I thank you for that. But I'd love to hear not only from you, but Intel and other corporations.
I think that's a great question. really quick. Why I got funding was because I followed my passion for diversity and inclusion. So I became, back then, a member of Project Include, which is nonprofit, and we're hiring for a program manager. If anyone wants to go, projectinclude.org. But I said, I'm not going to get funding, but I happened to go at a retreat with Project Include Women that knew the investor that ended up investing in what we're doing. But that being said, it was other women in corporations that I said, I have this crazy product idea around machine learning and diversity and inclusion, but I need access to the data. And so it was almost all of them women who said, okay, I'm going to go up to my corporation, a public company, and they're like, we can sign up a 6-month free trial so you can validate your idea. I think it's really commendable what Microsoft is doing. Let's talk offline. I'd be more than happy to share, because I've done all the good and I'm fundraising again. Like, I'm about to go meet an investor at the airport on Tuesday morning while on my way to DC. But definitely, I think fundraising is the hardest thing you'll ever do, and you never want to do it again, and then you'll always have to do it again.
Is there another question?
Maybe just one quick comment for you as a CEO and a woman of color founding a company. So Intel, for example, has set aside $125 million of our Intel Capital Venture Fund to invest in women-owned startups, minority-owned startups. And so sometimes it's a matter of that network, right? You know me, come up after and let's talk, and let me introduce you to the people in our VC company, because sometimes I think it's a matter of, like Laura said, those personal connections and that personal network to get that access to capital. I do think as corporations, it's incumbent on us to make sure that funding is accessible and is set aside, and that if we say we practice diversity and inclusion, to put our money where our mouth is.
Thank you. Great answer. Important question and a great answer. Anyone else want to respond to that one? Are there other questions? We'll take a couple more. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I want to commend each and every one of you for what you're doing in your respective roles. The piece that really resonated with me mostly today was the social justice piece. I am in Atlanta, Georgia. We bounce back and forth between the #1 and the #2 position in the nation for income inequality. What we also do is we also maintain one of the #1 positions when it comes to educated Black college students and educated Black professionals. However, the tech ecosystem does not necessarily represent us at all. And so I wanted to understand, for those of you whose jobs are directly related to social justice or social innovation, is there a focus? Are you guys aware of that? Is there a focus on Atlanta right now in terms of opportunity?
And it's so contrary to Atlanta's PR, because you get the impression that it's sort of a kind of a Mecca nirvana for African Americans. But the facts don't bear that out, do they?
Well, and the other piece of, did I lose this? Okay, so the other piece of that I want to just kind of educate the room on is that you're starting to see pieces that are actually published in Forbes, TechCrunch, across the board, right? And they're talking about Atlanta's tech ecosystem, and we're becoming a tech mecca. What they're not stating is that those are actually going towards companies that are probably at the mid-level growth standpoint of like $20 million. And they're helping them scale, but there's not one single organization right now outside of Catherine Finney's Digital Undivided that is focused on early stage entrepreneurs. And that is where most of the people that I'm speaking to that are now falling into that bucket that are representing that income inequality gap on the lower side, that's where those fall. So I'd love for any or all of you guys to address that.
Anybody looking at Atlanta critically?
Actually, we are, but not necessarily from the tech standpoint. We've noticed that half of our very successful salespeople are Morehouse men. So what we've started now is a mentoring program. Morehouse actually has in the business administration a sales minor. So one of the things we're doing is we're teaching them Salesforce in college, right? So, and then Atlanta also has access to at least 10 Fortune 500 companies. So concentrating sales professionals there is highly important. So one of the things we're doubling down on is Future Force, right? So at the founding of Salesforce, we have a foundation with the 111 model. And I won't bore you, but basically 1% 4% of our employees' time goes to volunteering in their community. So every employee has 56 hours a year to use volunteering. So these brothers in Atlanta have basically said, we're going to adopt this Morehouse College, right? Or this business administration with a sales minor. So we're focused there, and now we've brought on our first 5 interns from this Morehouse opportunity, and 5 is good because they had 9 with the major. So 5 is good to us. And so we're kind of nourishing that environment. I can't necessarily speak to what we're doing on the venture side, but absolutely looking at there's a high concentration of educated professionals coming out of college and making sure this tech opportunity doesn't miss them.
Is there another question? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Tamron Bobineau, and I have like a 2-part question. So I'm here at the tech conference, which is great, but I represent science because my background is biology. And some of the things that I do is STEM education for students and help create this pipeline to get them to going into STEM. So the first part question is any advice or ideas about diversity and inclusion throughout STEM? Because a lot of times I'm asked to go talk to students or go to a school because they don't know Black women in science. Even though I am in science, so I know a plethora of them, but it seems like, especially in the Bay Area, because I'm coming from Oakland, we don't see African Americans in science or actually throughout STEM to talk to these students. And then the second part question is any ideas about, or any of the companies are doing something that helps create that pipeline. So going into the schools, starting at elementary, teaching them these types of ideas in tech and getting them coming from Oakland in the Bay Area to go to the Valley and come to these jobs in these places here.
I can answer the second part of the question, and maybe somebody else can take the first. So Intel is definitely investing in the community, and especially in Oakland. We've made a $5 million investment over 5 years to go into the high schools there and bring STEM education, computer science and engineering as part of the curriculum there. This is our 3rd year of our partnership with the Oakland School District, and we've increased the number of students studying computer science, engineering, and math exponentially. And more importantly, we've moved the needle on the teachers and the parents who believe their students could study STEM. We're now where we've got those students in college, and we're helping them with internships at Intel for the summer and scholarships, and it's been an incredible partnership. I'd be happy to share more with you afterwards. Yeah, please.
I want Nikki Lasley to stand up. This woman right here has been responsible for the $6 million Salesforce has given to public schools in San Francisco and in Oakland. And the other philosophy we have at Salesforce is to go out, and we call it Circle of School. And what that means is just show up to a school and ask the principal, what do you need? I'm gonna give you an example, and I apologize, but it's Indianapolis. But our team there raised funds, and they bought iPads for the most underprivileged elementary school there. And they showed up and they thought, oh, we're gonna teach these kids code, and they're gonna be math whizzes, and we're gonna have all these contests. And the principal said, these kids can't read in the 3rd grade. They can't read to code. They can't read to do this. So we're starting with the fundamental need of understanding by the 4th grade, a child needs to be exposed to a computer to be able to compete in this job market. And I always look back at my growing up, and I'm not that old, but my brother took apart our VCR. He got a whooping. But you hear about every tech founder who took apart their computer and how that was praised and how there was access to more than one computer. We had one VCR and he broke it, right? So you have to think about the access and how we're fundamentally raising our kids. It's like that thing is just so poignant to me.
Maybe one other thing to underscore what the other folks have said. I think positive identity formation is so important. I think like Tunde rocks this at Street Code Academy. I see Brandon in the back, Hidden Genius Project, who we funded in Oakland. We funded the African American Male Achievement Program. Let's give a hand to those folks. They're really the heroes who are doing the real work. And I think what's so impactful about these programs is, of course, they're doing the rigor on the technical side, and they're teaching their young people how to code and how to break things apart, but they're also really like the African American Male Achievement Program, which we give $1 million to in Oakland. they call their kids kingmakers. I mean, I just think that's powerful to like change the dominant narrative. You know, Brandon and his scholars, like Tunde and his scholars, like I think it's just really important that we not only invest in programs that are doing the hardcore technical work, but also invest in the positive identity formation. I'll give one other quick Google plug, which is we are piloting these new tech centers where we're partnering with people like Hidden Genius Project in Oakland and taking the young people, and we're almost viewing it like a talent scouting model where we've got a physical center now in Oakland where we're taking some of those kids after school and on the weekends and really viewing them just like we recruit MBA students, and they're now going into middle school. I was watching this doc the other day about, you know, the shoe companies are all the way down to middle school recruiting like the best talent out of middle school. Why can't we do that for tech? And so Google's really trying to figure out, like, how can we tap, and Yolanda and her team are the ones that are rocking that program, how can we go in there and tap those young geniuses in the community who have all that potential and talent, identify them early and support them all the way through in collaborations with partners like Hidden Genius in the community. So
I think that's great. Time. I want to thank our panelists. I believe they're calling time on me. We've got to move on now to the reception. They were wonderful. I do want to just tell you very quickly that the National Council of Negro Women has also caught the spirit, Reverend. And we are doing what we call a HBCU STEM College Fair, where we bring in HBCUs that focus on STEM education. The Fort Valleys, the North Carolina A&Ts, put them in front of 1,000 kids at a time. And they come with grants and aid and scholarships and encouraging and recruiting the young people to come major in STEM disciplines, including science. So thank you for the inspiration. Thank you all panelists. Let's give them another round of applause. And Reverend Bryant's gonna come take it away.
I told you she was amazing. Let's give our wonderful moderator a hand. I told you. The fantastic panel. Give them a hand, ladies and gentlemen. Give them a hand. They were wonderful.
You guys are great.
A couple of quick housekeeping notes, and we're going to have a closing word from Reverend Jackson. But can we give our audio-visual team a hand as well? Because they're doing... And the reason I want to give them a big shout-out is because they need us to move quickly because they have to do some business to get ready for what's coming next, all right? So we don't want to get in their way. We want to make sure they can put all the cords down they need to put down and all the lights, camera, action for our sports tech event that starts at 6 p.m. this evening, 6 p.m. right back in this room. And so they're going to reset the room. And I'm going to ask our panelists and sponsors if you would sit tight for just a minute after we finish, because we need to take a couple of pictures with you in front of our Push Tech logo before we let you disappear, all right? So the sponsors and panelists, please stay put. Everyone else, when we dismiss you in a couple of minutes, I want you to go back into the atrium area behind us, to the red carpet, and to continue to network and enjoy each other. And if you're going home, going hitting the freeways, be safe on your way. Those of you going to the Warrior game, go Dubs. And as we get ready for sports tech, and we do have our red carpet, we have our photographers that are going to be out on the red carpet. Of course, you have your phones that you're going to pull out for a couple of things in a minute. But on the red carpet is going to be the MC for our event tonight, our sports tech event. Our MC happens to be a Super Bowl champion San Francisco 49er. You do remember there was a time that they didn't go 2-14. And during those times, the last time they were the champs, this particular brother was right there on the D-line doing some amazing work. And he's here tonight. He's going to MC our program. Would you all welcome former San Francisco 49er, world champion, Super Bowl champ, Mr. Dennis Brown. Stand up, Dennis. So Dennis is going to ease out there now. So as you get moving out there, you can go on out to the red carpet, get your photos with our 49er legend that's in the room. And again, we thank our tech team and all the planners that have been a part of this event. So panelists and sponsors, stay put. Everyone else, after Reverend finishes last comment, we're going to dismiss out to the atrium. And can you give it up one more time for our leader, the phenomenal, the amazing, and the wonderful Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson.
Let me, first of all, thank all of you for your presence. I want to express particular thanks for our staff member who helped to co-found this project, who's done such an amazing job. He's a giant in his own right, Lyle Butch Wayne. Bush is the co-director of the Push Tech Conference. And the other Push Tech co-chair is Reverend Joseph Bryant.
Hey.
And part of he is co-director because we're building and developing leadership as we go. Somewhere here is Dr. McGowan. Where's McGowan? He is another Morehouse man. He is our field director. Give him a hand wherever he is, find him. Political director is Brother Shelley Pierre Davis.
Exciting news! The free Rainbow Push mobile app is ready for download. Get all the news and schedules for the upcoming convention and more. Go to the Rainbow Push homepage at www.rainbowpush.org to download app today. Noticias importantes. La aplicación móvil y gratis de Rainbow Push está lista para utilizar. Obtengan todas las noticias y horarios para la próxima convención y mucho más. Visiten la página de inicio de Rainbow Push en www.rainbowpush.org para descargar la aplicación hoy.
When I think of Rainbow Push, I think of two words: social justice.
Education advocacy.
Political empowerment.
Freedom and equality.
Global humanitarian.
Evolutionary, revolutionary.
Political change.
Inclusion, evolution.
Push Excel.
Progress, justice.
Jesse Jackson.
Left with disciplines.
Equality and perseverance.
Workforce partnership.
People united.
Push yes.
And it was Jesse Jackson who was the young man of the movement and now is an elder statesman. And we've got to make sure that we have another generation that will be pushing forward, another generation that will be building an Operation Breadbasket, another generation that will be talking about new economic strategies for those who are poor.
And ensuring that we are never politically disenfranchised. I hope you already recognize that there is a movement afoot to rob us of what we fought so hard for and shed blood for, and that is the right to express our voice through voting.
It is our duty, it is our job to support our organizations.
We got to do it. Grassroots organization, hitting the streets and challenging those in the suites.
Make sure you join Operation Push, Rainbow Push, today.
Keep hope alive.